Hi, my name's John Rush. I'm a senior architectural historian and historic preservation specialist at the consulting firm ICF. Welcome to our tour of Market Street. We hope you enjoy it. So we'll start the tour here at the intersection of Market Street and Stuart Street. This is the eastern terminus of Market Street, and we can have a good view of a couple of really distinctive features of the Market Street redevelopment plan design. These include the red brick paving, which extends all the way along the sidewalk of Market Street, as well as the granite curb here, which lines the street from here to Octavia Boulevard.
The movement to redesign Market Street emerged in parallel with the effort to construct the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District, or BART, which was approved by voters in 1962. That same year, Market Street business people and property owners agreed upon a few different goals: to transform Market Street into one of the world's most attractive boulevards, to rid Market Street of its shabby atmosphere, and to put new life into Market Street as a center of Bay Area business, shopping, and entertainment. Their hope was to update the appearance and feeling of Market Street to appeal to the tastes of middle-class workers and shoppers, which meant replacing aging infrastructure and some of the quote-unquote unsavory people who used it. The group retained a team of consultants, which included local landscape architect Lawrence Halprin, to analyze Market Street, define its problems, and suggest an approach to revitalization. The resulting study proposed a program of redevelopment that featured improvements to Market Street signage, street furniture, tree plantings, site features like fountains and sculptures, and arrangement of squares and plazas. Not long after, the City and County of San Francisco commissioned the Market Street Joint Venture Architects, consisting of architects Mario Ciampi and John Carl Warneke, as well as Halprin, to build upon this new concept for San Francisco's Main Street. The team sought to reinforce Market Street's economic and cultural importance as San Francisco's main circulation spine by introducing plazas, removing visually cluttering commercial signage, and adding sidewalk landscape designs that blended new street-level BART facilities into the overall streetscape. The Market Street redevelopment plan was built between 1968 and 1979 and aimed to provide an alternative to the destructive and divisive approaches to urban redevelopment that preceded it. The pedestrian-oriented design philosophy and sensitivity to historic settings reflected the specializations of the designers, who sought to prioritize the human experience and awareness of the existing built environment. These are considerations that have grown to be widely adopted as best practices within the urban planning and landscape design professions. Paradoxically, construction of BART in the new Market Street streetscape lasted years and disrupted downtown commerce, and not all agree that the project has met its lofty goals. One way in which the architects prioritized the pedestrian experience was by placing small and large plazas across the length of Market Street. These pedestrian plazas offer room-like open spaces that encourage pause for pedestrians. The first plaza on our tour is Embarcadero Plaza, originally known as Justin Herman Plaza. The plaza was implemented as part of the City of San Francisco's broader effort to redevelop the Embarcadero area, and the location and timing of the project allowed it to be included as a component of the design concept for the Market Street redevelopment plan. Lawrence Halprin, who had national recognition by this time, was hired as the plaza's landscape architect. The plaza was reminiscent of an Italian piazza intended for users to participate in both planned activities such as concerts and passive activities such as eating lunch. Located in a mixed hotel, luxury apartment, and office district, it attracted workers, tourists, and local families.
So the focal point of Embarcadero Plaza, of course, is the fountain behind me, which was designed by Quebecois artist Armand Vaillancourt. The fountain reflects an important component of the original physical context of this plaza, which was the fact that in the 60s and 70s, there was a raised freeway that ran along the Embarcadero behind it. So that freeway really created a boundary between this end of Market Street and the waterfront and the ferry building behind it. So Embarcadero Plaza didn't function as a thoroughfare between the two. Instead, it was really a place where that terminated Market Street and was nestled against this wall of the freeway. Halprin was really thinking at that time very closely about the influence of freeways in urban settings. He recognized that they were disruptive, but he also saw them as the sources of potential creative expression. So this is what this fountain does. It kind of reflects the materiality and visual sense of the freeway, but also creates an interactive experience for users of the plaza, and it also mediates between the human scale of the plaza and the unhuman scale of the freeway. When the Market Street redevelopment plan was implemented in the 1960s and 1970s, Market Street was actually over 120 years old at that point. Its very distinctive diagonal orientation was the vision of the general surveyor of Alta California, whose name was Jasper O'Farrell. O'Farrell came up with the idea in 1847 with the concept that Market Street was going to become the grand boulevard of San Francisco, which at that point was a very small settlement, just an outpost in the United States. However, after Market Street was constructed in the 1840s, it very quickly spurred a great deal of real estate investment as a number of buildings were constructed right alongside of it. At first they were, wood framed, but then over the decades they were replaced by larger, more ornate masonry buildings. At the same time, Market Street became the primary transportation corridor of San Francisco. By the 1860s, it hosted various forms of transit, including steam-powered railroads, horse-drawn streetcars, and cable cars. A lot of these aspects are still visible in Market Street. So obviously, we still have the street walls that really show its primary importance in downtown San Francisco. Of course, the street walls are now mostly post-World War II high-rise office towers. But multiple transportation modes exist as well, including muni buses and the historic F line, which runs on rail tracks down the middle of the street. And then, of course, BART runs underneath. The one thing that has kind of changed about Market Street in the post-war period was the greater emphasis on pedestrians. And one of the changes that the Market Street redevelopment plan introduced was widening these pedestrian zones, the sidewalks, to 35 feet. And those, of course, again, are defined by the red brick pavers that run the stretch of Market Street. So we're now in Robert Frost Plaza, which is one of the small plazas along Market Street. It's at Drum Street, which is just one block west of Embarcadero Plaza. The placement of the small plazas and the large plazas along Market Street reflects one of the important design concepts of the Market Street redevelopment plan, which is having a cadence or rhythm of areas where pedestrians can stop, mingle, rest, providing a variety of experiences as they move across the Market Street corridor.
The plaza is named for the San Francisco-born poet Robert Frost, who is commemorated with the memorial plaque located at the center of the plaza. Other original features that remain include the herringbone red brick pattern that matches the rest of Market Street, and a bronze four-sided clock mounted upon a granite pillar. A wood slat bench and light pole with a square, translucent glass light were components of the original design, but have since been removed.
So we are now across Drum Street from Robert Frost Plaza, and this spot gives us a good vantage point towards the Hyatt Regency Hotel and one of the office towers of the Embarcadero Center behind it. Both of these buildings are components of the much larger Golden Gateway redevelopment area, which was planned and constructed by the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency in the 1960s and 1970s, which really shows the important social and cultural context of redevelopment in San Francisco. So I'm now standing at the corner of Market Street and Battery Street at Mechanics Monument Plaza. The focal point of the plaza is Mechanics Monument, which is one of the several monuments and sculptures that the Market Street Joint Ventures architects retained in the Market Street redevelopment plan design.
This cast bronze sculpture of workers positioned around an oversized lever punch machine weighs 10 tons. At the base of the machine are an anvil, a wheel, and two overlapping medallion portraits of Peter and James Donahue with a Latin inscription that translates to "Work Conquers All."
It dates to 1901 and was originally a collaboration between sculptor Douglas Tilden, who designed the bronze sculpture at the top of the monument, and renowned Beaux-Arts architect Willis Polk, who designed the base of the monument. It honors San Francisco industrialist Peter Donahue, who founded the Union Iron Works in 1850.
The Market Street redevelopment plan relocated the monument a short distance from its original location. Again in 2014, the plaza was redesigned to incorporate additional street furniture and new paving. The monument speaks to San Francisco labor history, to which Market Street also has a close association. By the turn of the 20th century, Market Street had become the principal site of most public processions and parades in San Francisco. Labor Day parades typically traveled up Market Street to the Mechanics Pavilion at 10th Street, but often slowed around the Chronicle building at Kearny Street to protest the staunchly anti-union San Francisco Chronicle.
Another historic feature is the Admission Day Monument, which is at the foot of Montgomery Street.
The monument memorializes California's admission into the Union in 1850. Like the Mechanics Monument, the sculpture was designed by Douglas Tilden, and Willis Polk designed the pedestal. The project also involved architect Daniel Burnham, known as the father of the City Beautiful movement.
The monument was commissioned in 1897 by former San Francisco Mayor James Phelan, who dedicated this to the Native Sons of the Golden West, or the Native Sons. That was the San Francisco organization whose headquarters was just a few blocks away from here. Their goal was to commemorate the gold rush history of the state, but they were also well known for their staunchly anti-immigration stance. So the formal beauty of this monument really belies the ideals behind that organization. Our next stop is Crocker Plaza, which is located at the intersection of Market Street, Montgomery Street, and Post Street. Crocker Plaza is named for its association with now controversial railroad pioneer Charles Crocker, whose estate purchased this entire site in the 19th century and built the Crocker Building, which stood here until the 1960s. At that point, the Crocker Building was torn down to make way for the Aetna Life and Casualty Building, now known as One Post. Crocker Plaza was designed in collaboration with the Market Street redevelopment plan, but its landscape architect was Sasaki Walker & Associates, so not Lawrence Halprin. However, it was designed to match the pavement pattern of the Market Street redevelopment plan and is meant to replicate and contribute to the pattern of repeating plazas along Market Street. So Crocker Plaza, which is now known as One Post Plaza, has a primary street-level plaza and then a sunken plaza that hosts some commercial retail spaces as well as an entrance to the subsurface BART system. Located in a traffic island at the intersection of Market, Geary, and Kearny Streets is Islatus Fountain. It stands 24 feet tall and is constructed of cast iron. It features a series of lion heads and several basins for the fountain. It is unusual for a fountain in the fact that it has a glass globe at the top.
The fountain is named for Charlotte Crabtree, or Miss Lotta, one of the most famous entertainers of her era. Lotta began her career singing in mining camps, eventually moving to San Francisco in 1856, where she began performing in major theaters and vaudeville houses. To take her career to new heights, Lotta eventually moved to New York and later Chicago, performing all over the country. She was possibly the highest paid female entertainer of her era. Her last trip to San Francisco was in 1915 for Lotta Crabtree Day at the Panama Pacific International Exposition.
The earthquake that hit San Francisco in April 1906 was a very transformative moment for the city. Over 28,000 buildings across the city were destroyed, including the majority of those that were along Market Street.
Once debris had been removed, a wide array of infrastructure had to be reconstructed across San Francisco, including the cable car system and the city's streets. New infrastructure was also added, including the fire department's auxiliary water supply system, or AWSS. In 1913, the initial phase of the AWSS was completed and featured pumping facilities, distribution pipes, and a series of high-pressure hydrants located throughout the core of the city.
Here is one hydrant of that system, and about 60 are alongside the Market Street corridor. So some of the most prominent historic features retained in the Market Street redevelopment plan design are the Patho Gold light standards. These were installed between 1906 and 1916, generally in pairs along Market Street between the Embarcadero and Valencia Street. The Patho Gold name refers to the soft glow light that comes through the golden glass globes. The design features a base designed by sculptor Arthur Putnam, a pole assembly designed by Willis Polk, and then the trident tops, which were installed later. Those were designed by a separate sculptor, Leo Lentelli, and a lighting engineer, Walter Darcy Ryan.
The design of Putnam's sculpted base, called Winning of the West, offers a problematic narrative of Western expansion that often went unchallenged during the early 20th century.
One of the more memorable street features along Market Street is Samuel's Clock, which stands 18 feet tall. It's located between Powell Street and Stockton Street on the north side of Market Street, and it dates to 1915. It was commissioned by the Austrian immigrant and watchmaker Albert Samuels. He first installed it outside of his business at 895 Market Street and moved it to its current location in the 1940s. And the Market Street redevelopment plan retained this feature, and as the clock itself says, it is one of the finest street clocks in America. We're now at Holiday Plaza, which is the second of the large plazas along Market Street. We're at the corner of Powell Street and Market Street, near 5th Street. And this reflects one of the realities of working along the Market Street corridor, which is the series of oddly shaped triangular lots that are adjacent to Market Street. This required that the Market Street redevelopment plan design team think about the streets that intersect here. Eddy Street to my left, and then Powell Street in front of me were closed to traffic and made into pedestrian malls that form part of this plaza. Another advantage of working in a site like this is the intersecting streets provide channels for sunlight that can really cast light on the Market Street corridor that otherwise wouldn't be able to when buildings were previously here. So like other plazas along Market Street, Holiday Plaza functions as a transit hub and a connection to the subsurface BART and Muni systems. However, it's, I would say, a more important role at this particular plaza. As you can see behind me, there's a large entrance to the Powell Street BART and Muni station. So the plaza functions as a route for people to leave transit and enter the Union Square retail district, and also allows them to exit the neighborhood and board transit. The idea of having a multi-tiered sunken plaza was Halperin's. He wanted to offer a change from the monotony, single-plane experience of Market Street. So it has functional characteristics, but also the design concept of the stepped terraces along the edges of Holiday Plaza could also facilitate just gathering and viewing as if an amphitheater for events. So we're now in the largest plaza along Market Street, which is UN Plaza, or United Nations Plaza. It was dedicated in 1976 to commemorate the founding of the United Nations in 1945.
This 2.5-acre plaza serves as a tree-lined approach to the Civic Center, as well as an open space for the mid-market area. The design landscape features a set of linear axes with a commanding fountain near Market Street. Lawrence Halperin was the primary designer of UN Plaza. He designed this plaza, as with his other public plazas, for the diversity of events and users found in cities. Both the plaza and fountain were designed to direct views towards City Hall. UN Plaza was the pivot point off Market Street and offered a path for parades to march along toward the steps of City Hall. Halperin directed views towards City Hall through the linear spatial arrangement emphasized by several elements, which include London plane trees, raised planting beds, and the dominant rows of light standards along the Fulton Street Promenade.
Like at Embarcadero Plaza, UN Plaza has a prominent fountain that Halperin incorporated into his design. This particular fountain is composed of a series of large granite slabs. Each one weighs about 3 to 4 tons, and are set into groups that symbolize the world's continents. The water symbolizes the world's oceans, and originally had a kind of filling and emptying mechanism that represented the tidal cycles. However, now the arced jets are all that are operational. Halperin's vision for UN Plaza included it being a site of social gatherings, parades, and protests. This has definitely been supported by the fact that it links Market Street with City Hall, so many parades that follow Market Street leave Market Street at this point and then proceed into Civic Center. In 1985, a group of activists chose this area of UN Plaza in front of the federal building as the site of a peaceful demonstration against the federal government and its inaction against the AIDS epidemic. Their vigil lasted for 10 years and is among the longest running acts of civil disobedience in San Francisco history.
In a similar spirit, Market Street has served as a backdrop for public interaction and social protest since its earliest days. This pattern was particularly strong around the themes of labor, civil rights, and peace during the 1960s and 70s. Some events have included protests against military interventions, marches for African American civil rights, and a disability rights sit-in. One of the most significant civic engagement events on Market Street during the 20th century was the launch of the San Francisco LGBTQ Pride Celebration and Parade. While the first gay rights parade took place in 1970 on Polk Street, beginning in 1977, the Gay Freedom Day parades traveled west across Market Street from downtown to City Hall. The parades of 1977 and 1978 drew hundreds of thousands of people, making it the biggest annual parade in San Francisco. The San Francisco Chronicle reported that the 1978 parade may have been the largest single political gathering in San Francisco and possibly the country in the 1970s. For that same parade, a group of artists created a rainbow flag based on a design by artist Gilbert Baker, which flew for the first time in UN Plaza. In subsequent years, the rainbow flag has come to be recognized internationally as a symbol for LGBTQ pride.
So we've now reached Market Street's intersection with Van Ness Avenue, a major north-south corridor that really forms the western boundary of downtown San Francisco and the Civic Center district. So from the west here, Market Street really enters more of a mixed residential and commercial neighborhood that goes adjacent to neighborhoods like Hayes Valley and the northern end of the Castro. However, the transit entrances still continue. This particular station is the Van Ness Avenue station that serves just the Muni streetcar system. Like all of the transit entrances along Market Street, though, just has a simple lobe wall that matches the overall minimalist architectural character of the streetscape. For the last step of our tour, we've reached Octavia Boulevard, which is the western end of the Market Street redevelopment plan design. So this is the last area that we have the red brick paving that we've seen throughout the tour. To the west of here, Market Street just transitions to simple concrete sidewalks. Octavia Boulevard was the natural endpoint for the design in the 1960s and 70s because Octavia Boulevard was actually the location of a raised freeway that was demolished after the 1989 earthquake.
Aerial images show the contrasting red brick and pavement that makes up the sidewalks southwest of Market Street. The three designers associated with the Market Street redevelopment plan in San Francisco, Ciampi, Warnke, and Halprin, developed their expertise as master designers during a period of great urban change and development practice, often referred to as urban renewal, that correspond with the years after World War II. This period is also associated with increased collaboration among design disciplines. These designers were thought leaders in the environmental design community, applying new approaches to urban placemaking that modeled pedestrian-oriented design, harmonizing postmodern design within historic settings, developing public spaces for positive economic and social impact, and collaborative design processes. The joint venture of these masters was an early application of an interdisciplinary approach to design, bringing together masters in the fields of architecture and landscape architecture. Their effort helped elevate landscape architecture as a discipline that provides essential perspective on modern urban planning. The project illustrates the growing viability in the post-war period of prioritizing sensitivity to the human experience and the existing built environment as a part of the urban redevelopment process. For nearly 5 decades, Market Street has reflected the innovative ideas of its design team, but its importance is easily overlooked as San Francisco's and visitors conduct their everyday routines. The fact that the design of Market Street is so taken for granted speaks to its silent but important role shaping the experiences of so many who pass through downtown San Francisco.